Hello, 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 and welcome back to 90 Day Word with Kachael, where we are reading through the entire Bible in 90 days. We just finished day 35, where we read Nehemiah, the entire chapter. That's Nehemiah chapters 1 through 13. And there were a couple things that really caught my attention while we were reading. The first one came in Nehemiah chapter 4. Now, here we have Nehemiah. He and some of the remnant of Israel have come back, and they are now building the wall around Jerusalem. And it turns out that as they're building this wall around Jerusalem, there are groups of people that hear about it and are not happy with it. And one of these people is Sanballat. And I think Tobiah, Sanballat and Tobiah, yes. And so they hear that this wall is getting built, and so what they decide to do is to essentially attack them or to fight with them so that their work can be hindered, right? And what I love about this right here is that they don't stop working. Nehemiah has said, God has called us to do this work. We're here for a purpose. And though there are people that are trying to stop us and keep us from doing the work, we are not going to stop. And so what he did is he set up half of the people to be watchmen, to stand guard with bows and spears and arrows. And the other half are working. So they are prepared to fight at the same time that they're working. Likewise, the workers are also armed. So it says that in one hand they have their axe or their working tools, and in the other hand, and on their hip, they're girded with their swords for fighting. So they are working and they are ready to fight. But they do not stop the work to fight. And they do not let the fear of Sanballat and Tobiah and these people that are trying to come against them keep them from working. They change and they alter their actions a little bit to be ready and prepared in case the fight comes to them. But while they're waiting for the fight to come, if the fight ever comes, they're working. And Nehemiah also says that, I think, he says that everyone's going to abide within Jerusalem. But because there's so few of them, they're spread thin. He says, if you hear the horn blow, leave and come help and come fight. But do not fear, because God is on our side. God is fighting with us. And then the last thing that it says in chapter 4 is that, so neither I, nor my brethren, nor my servants, nor the men of the guard which follow me, none of us put off our clothes, saving that every man put them off for washing. So they were standing guard at night. They were working by the day. And the only time they took off their clothes was to wash them, not to rest, because usually you take off your clothes to rest, right? But they only took them off to wash, meaning that they were constantly on guard. They were constantly ready for anything that would happen. And at the same time, they were constantly building this wall. And I think that a lot of times for us as believers today, when we get in a battle, when we get in a fight, or when we have opposition coming against us, or we hear of opposition coming against us, we put aside the work that God has called us to do, or what we are supposed to be doing at that time, to focus now on the battle. But I believe that Nehemiah here is speaking something that God would have us to realize, that there are times when we are called to do a work, and our first thought, Our main focus should be in doing the work that God has called us to do to completion. And yes, there are threats of war, there are threats of attack coming from the side, but that should not deter us or take our focus off of what God has called us to do. We are supposed to stay focused on what He has called us to do. And while we are focused on what God has called us to do, we are also uniquely aware of the fact that there might be a battle coming. And so we are likewise prepared for battle. So we work up until the fight comes to us. And if the fight happens to get to us, we are ready. We have our swords, we have our spears, we have our bows, we have our shields handy. But we don't stop the work to fight the battle. We don't allow the battle to distract us. Because sometimes that's all it is the enemy trying to distract us. Because the battle didn't come to them. They never had to fight Sanballat and Tobiah. But they were ready if it came. But see, Sanballat and Tobiah were meant to be a distraction. The enemy trying to take them off the focus of getting that wall built. And if they had turned their head to focus on Sanballat and Tobiah, on this distraction, on this imminent threat and danger, they would have lost sight of all that God had called them to do and the progress that they were making. This happens again in I think it's verse 5. Is it not verse 5? Nehemiah chapter 6. Again, Sanballat and Tobiah, these distracting spirits, if we want to use that to describe them, distractions. Not distractions. That's all they were. They were trying to get Nehemiah to call Nehemiah down to come meet with them. And Nehemiah said, why would I come meet with you when I am doing God's work here? There again, Nehemiah says, I have a job to do. God called me to build this wall. And now you're trying to get me to come down there to meet with you. That's not what God called me to do. God called me to stay here and build this wall. Nehemiah is staying focused. Right? And so he doesn't go down to meet them. And they try again. And they try to get and they send it said that that someone is going to come slay you. This prophet says you need to go shut yourself up in the temple because they're coming to slay you, and at night. And Nehemiah says, who am I that I would flee? Why would I go into the temple to save my life? But God had shown him that this was a prophecy come from Tobiah and Sanballat, that this prophet had been hired by Tobiah and Sanballat to get him to fear and then to flee from what God has called him to do. So instead of being out working on the wall, to flee inside the temple to, quote, save his life. But he's saying, no, the temple is not my job. That's not where God called me to be. God called me to be on this wall, working to build this wall. And you're sitting here trying to scare me to get me to be afraid to run from what God has called me to do. You are trying to distract me with threats of death. Have I not already showed you that I am ready for the battle? Bring the battle to me. I'm ready. My men are ready. We have axes in one hand and swords in another. We are working, but yet we are ready for the battle if you want to bring it to us. We are not going to flee because our job is to do this, which God has called us to do, which is to build this wall right here. And that's what Nehemiah is saying. And it's so interesting that what he says is He says, therefore was he hired that I should be afraid and do so and sin, that they might have matter for an evil report, that they might reproach me. That I should be afraid and do so and sin. That I should be afraid and do so and sin. Right here, this speaks to me, and this tells me that sometimes the fear that would cause us to move away from what God has called us to do leads us to sin. That fear, when handled incorrectly, can lead us to sin. Not that being afraid is a sin, but that the actions that result from fear, if not handled the way God would have us to handle them, could cause us to sin. If Nehemiah had left his post, God said, go build this wall. If Nehemiah had left his post for any reason other than God telling him to go somewhere, he would have been in sin. And the fear of being killed, if that had caused him to run and to flee to the temple, out of Jerusalem, back to the king's court, wherever, if he had been so afraid that he would have done that and ran, he would have been in sin, because he would have left the post that God appointed him to and left the task for which God called him to do. And then they could reproach him for it. You, Nehemiah, have sinned. You're in sin. Who are you that you should continue to do this thing or lead this work? And then if Nehemiah had left or fled or fell, imagine what would happen to that. If they could bring that evil report against him that Nehemiah sinned, he left this post. He was supposed to be there doing the work, and he went here. Imagine how that could cause this entire movement to end. So we have to be mindful of what works are at play when we are where God would call us to be. Sometimes it's simply being distracted. You're doing something that God wants you to do, but the enemy doesn't want to see you succeed, and so he sends distractions. Hey, you're going to be attacked. Hey, someone's coming for you. And we can either stay focused on what God has called us to do and do the thing with a sword in hand, fully aware that we might be attacked and ready for that attack, or we can be distracted and look off to where the attack is coming from and try to go fight that war, when that's not what God called us to do, when God called us to work this thing. Likewise, it can be fear. Well, somebody's going to come kill you, so you should run. Leave it. Don't worry about it. Run. I mean, don't you care about your life? But we should have a heart after God that cares more about the thing that he has called us to do than our own lives, that we don't care. We don't care if someone's going to kill us. That's not my concern right now. My concern is doing the job for which I was created to do and which God called me to do. Whether I die, whether I'm attacked, whether I'm enslaved or held bondage, it doesn't matter. I'm doing God's work, and I'm going to be completely and wholeheartedly focused on that work. So this is an encouragement to all of you who are going through difficult times, when you feel that you're doing what God has called you to do, and you hear threats of attack, and you hear that things are not going to work out, and that something negative is going to happen. Pray about it and let God lead you. And if he says, stay where you are and continue to do the job, do so with a spear in hand and your tool in the other. Continue to work that thing until that threat is upon you. But be ready for it. The threat never came, but they were ready. So be ready to fight the battle if it comes. But do not let the battle or the fear of battle, the fear of danger, the fear of death keep you and distract you from doing what God called you to do. You are victorious. You are overcomers. So I love you, and I hope that you have a wonderful day.